clearly AI truly is a game-changing tool, and we need to get the regulation of this tool right, because my staff, for example, asked AI, it might have been GPT-4, it might have been, I don't know, one of the other entities, to create a song that my favorite band, BTS, a song that they would sing, somebody else's song, but neither of the artists were involved in creating what sounded like a really genuine song. So you can do a lot. We also asked, can there be a speech created talking about the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs and the chaos that it created using my voice, my kind of voice, and it created a speech that was really good. It almost made me think about, what do I need my staff for? So don't worry, that's not where we are.
Nervous laughter behind you.
Their jobs are safe. But there's so much that can be done. And one of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Altman, that intrigued me was you said GPT-4 can refuse harmful requests. So you must have put some thought into how your system, if I can call it that, can refuse harmful requests. What do you consider a harmful request? You can just keep it short.
Yeah. I'll give a few examples. One would be about violent content. Another would be about content that's encouraging self-harm. Another is adult content. Not that we think adult content is inherently harmful, but there's things that could be associated with that we cannot reliably enough differentiate, so we refuse all of it.
So those are some of the more obvious harmful kinds of information. But in the election context, for example, I saw a picture of former President Trump being arrested by PD, and that went viral. I don't know, is that considered harmful? I've seen all kinds of statements attributed to any one of us that could be put out there that may not rise to your level of harmful content, but there you have it. So two of you said that we should have a licensing scheme. I can't envision or imagine right now what kind of a licensing scheme we would be able to create to pretty much regulate the vastness of this game-changing tool. So are you thinking of an FTC kind of a system, an FCC kind of a system? What do the two of you even envision as a potential licensing scheme that would provide the kind of guardrails that we need to protect literally our country from harmful content?
To touch on the first part of what you said, there are things besides should this content be generated or not, that I think are also important. So that image that you mentioned was generated. I think it'd be a great policy to say generated images need to be made clear in all contexts that they were generated. And, then we still have the image out there, but we're at least requiring people to say this was a generated image.
Okay, well, you don't need an entire licensing scheme in order to make that a reality.
Where I think the licensing scheme comes in is not for what these models are capable of today, because as you pointed out, you don't need a new licensing agency to do that. But as we head, and this may take a long time, I'm not sure, as we head towards artificial general intelligence, and the impact that will have, and the power of that technology, I think we need to treat that as seriously as we treat other very powerful technologies, and that's where I personally think we need such a scheme.
I agree, and that is why by the time we're talking about AGI, we're talking about major harms that can occur through the use of AGI. So, Professor Marcus, what kind of a regulatory scheme would you envision? And we can't just come up with something, that is going to be take care of the issues that will arise in the future, especially with AGI. So, what kind of a scheme would you contemplate?
Well, first, if I can rewind just a moment, I think you really put your finger on the central scientific issue in terms of the challenges in building artificial intelligence. We don't know how to build a system that understands harm in the full breadth of its meaning. So what we do right now is we gather examples and we say, is this like the examples that we have labeled before? but that's not broad enough. And so I thought your questioning beautifully outlined the challenge that AI itself has to face in order to really deal with this. We want AI itself to understand harm, and that may require new technology. So I think that's very important. On this second part of your question, the model that I tend to gravitate towards, but I am not an expert here, is the FDA, at least as part of it, in terms of you have to make a safety case and say why the benefits outweigh the harms in order to get that license. Probably we need elements of multiple agencies. I'm not an expert there, but I think that the safety case part of it is incredibly important. You have to be able to have external reviewers that are scientifically qualified look at this and say, have you addressed enough? So I'll just give one specific example. AutoGPT frightens me. That's not something that OpenAI made, but something that OpenAI did make called ChatGPT plugins led a few weeks later to some building open source software called AutoGPT. And what AutoGPT does is it allows systems to access source code, access the internet, and so forth. And there are a lot of potential, let's say, cybersecurity risks there. There should be an external agency that says, well, we need to be reassured if you're going to release this product that there aren't going to be cybersecurity problems, or there are ways of addressing it.
So, Professor, I am running out of time. There's, I just wanted to mention, Ms. Montgomery, your model is a use model similar to what the EU has come up with, but the vastness of AI and the complexities involved, I think, would require more than looking at the use of it. I think that, based on what I'm hearing today, don't you think that we're probably going to need to do a heck of a lot more than to focus on what use it is being, AI is being used for. For example, you can ask AI to come up with a funny joke or something, but you can use you can ask the same AI tool to generate something that is like an election fraud kind of a situation. So I don't know how you will make a determination based on where you're going with the use model, how to distinguish those kinds of uses of this tool. So I think that if we're going to go toward a licensing kind of a scheme, we're going to need to put a lot of thought into how we're going to come up with an appropriate scheme that is going to provide the kind of future reference that we need to put in place. So I thank all of you for coming in and providing further food for thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much, Senator Hirono. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the flexibility as I've been back and forth between this committee and Homeland Security Committee, where there's a hearing going on right now on the use of AI in government. So it's AI Day on the Hill, or at least in the Senate, apparently. Now, for folks watching at home, if you never thought about AI until the recent emergence of generative AI tools, the developments in this space may feel like they've just happened all of a sudden. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Chair, is that they haven't. AI is not new, not for government, not for business, not for the public. In fact, the public uses AI all the time. And just for folks to be able to relate, I want to offer the example of anybody with a smartphone. Many features on your device leverage AI, including suggested replies, right, when we're text messaging or even to email, autocorrect features, including but not limited to spelling in our email and text applications. So I'm frankly excited to explore how we can facilitate positive AI innovation that benefits society while addressing some of the already known harms and biases that stem from the development and use of the tools today. Now, with language models becoming increasingly ubiquitous, I want to make sure that there's a focus on ensuring equitable treatment of diverse demographic groups. My understanding is that most research into evaluating and mitigating fairness harms has been concentrated on the English language, while non-English languages have received comparatively little attention or investment. And we've seen this problem before, and I'll tell you why I raise this. Social media companies, for example, have not adequately invested in content moderation tools and resources for their non-English, in non-English language. And I share this not just out of concern for non-US based users, but so many US-based users prefer a language other than English in their communication. So I'm deeply concerned about repeating social media's failure in AI tools and applications. Question, Mr. Altman and Ms. Montgomery, how are OpenAI and IBM ensuring language and cultural inclusivity that they're in their large language models? And it's even an area of focus in the development of your products.
So bias and equity in technology is a focus of ours and always has been. I think diversity in terms of the development of the tools, in terms of their deployment, so having diverse people that are actually training those tools, considering the downstream effects as well. We're also very cautious, very aware of the fact that we can't just be articulating and calling for these types of things without having the tools and the technology to test for bias and to apply governance across the life cycle of AI. So we were one of the first teams and companies to put toolkits on the market, deploy them, contribute them to open source that will do things like help to address, be the technical aspects in which we help to address issues like bias.
Can you speak just for a second specifically to language inclusivity?
Yeah, I mean, language, so we don't have a consumer platform, but we are very actively involved with ensuring that the technology we help to deploy in the large language models that we use in helping our clients to deploy technology is focused on and available in many languages.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz.
We think this is really important. One example is that we worked with the government of Iceland, which is a language with fewer speakers than many of the languages that are well represented on the internet, to ensure that their language was included in our model. And we've had many similar conversations, and I look forward to many similar partnerships with lower resource languages to get them into our models. GPT-4 is, unlike previous models of ours, which were good at English and not very good at other languages, now pretty good at a large number of languages. You can go pretty far down the list, ranked by number of speakers, and still get good performance. But for these very small languages, we're excited about custom partnerships to include that language into our model run. And the part of the question you asked about values and making sure that cultures are included, we're equally focused on that, excited to work with people who have particular data sets and to work to collect a representative set of values from around the world to draw these wide bounds of what the system can do. I also appreciate what you said about the benefits of these systems and wanting to make sure we get those to as wide of a group as possible. I think these systems will have lots of positive impact on a lot of people, but in particular, historically underrepresented groups in technology, people who have not had as much access to technology around the world. This technology seems like it can be a big lift up.
Great. And I know my question was specific to language inclusivity, but glad there's agreement on the broader commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I'll just give a couple more reasons why I think it's so critical. The largest actors in this space can afford the massive amount of data, the computing power, and they have the financial resources necessary to develop complex AI systems. But in this space, we haven't seen, from a workforce standpoint, the racial and gender diversity reflective of the United States of America. And we risk, if we're not thoughtful about it, contributing to the development of tools and approaches that only exacerbate the bias and inequities that exist in our society. So a lot of follow-up work to do there. In my time remaining, I do want to ask one more question. This committee and the public are right to pay attention to the emergence of generative AI. Now, this technology has a different opportunity and risk profile than other AI tools, and these applications have felt very tangible for the public due to the nature of the user interface and the outputs that they produce. But I don't think we should lose sight of the broader AI ecosystem as we consider AI's broader impact on society, as well as the design of appropriate safeguards. So, Ms. Montgomery, in your testimony, as you noted, AI is not new. Can you highlight some of the different applications that the public and policymakers should also keep in mind as we consider possible regulations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the generative AI systems that are available today are creating new issues that need to be studied. New issues around the potential to generate content that could be extremely misleading, deceptive, and the like. So those issues absolutely need to be studied. But we shouldn't also ignore the fact that AI is a tool. It's been around for a long time. It has capabilities beyond just generative capabilities. And again, that's why I think going back to this approach where we're regulating AI where it's touching people and society is a really important way to address it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. Senator Booker is next, but I think he's going to defer to Senator Ossoff.
Because Senator Ossoff is a very big deal. I don't know if you know.
I have a meeting at noon, and I'm grateful to you, Senator Booker, for yielding your time. You are, as always, brilliant and handsome. And thank you to the panelists for joining us. Thank you to the subcommittee leadership for opening us up to all committee members. If we're going to contemplate a regulatory framework, we're going to have to define what it is that we're regulating. So, Mr. Altman, any such law will have to include a section that defines the scope of regulated activities, technologies, tools, products. Just take a stab at it.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Senator Ossoff. I think it's super important. I think there are very different levels here, and I think it's important that any new approach, any new law does not stop the innovation from happening with smaller companies, open source models, researchers that are doing work at a smaller scale. That's a wonderful part of this ecosystem and of America, and we don't want to slow that down. There still may need to be some rules there, but I think we could draw a line at systems that need to be licensed in a very intense way. The easiest way to do it, I'm not sure if it's the best, but the easiest would be to talk about the amount of compute that goes into such a model. So we could, we could define a threshold of compute, and it'll have to change. It could go up or down. Down as we discover more efficient algorithms that says above this amount of compute, you are in this regime. What I would prefer, it's harder to do, but I think more accurate, is to define some capability thresholds and say a model that can do things X, Y, and Z, up to you all to decide. That's now in this licensing regime, but models that are less capable, we don't want to stop our open source community. We don't want to stop individual researchers. We don't want to stop new startups. Can proceed, with a different framework.
Thank you. As concisely as you can, please state which capabilities you'd propose we consider for the purposes of this definition.
I would love, rather than to do that off the cuff, to follow up with your office with like a
well, perhaps
opine things.
Opine, understanding that you're just responding and you're not making law.
All right. In the spirit of just opining, I think a model that can persuade, manipulate, influence a person's behavior or a person's beliefs, that would be a good threshold. I think a model that could help create novel biological agents would be a great threshold. Okay. Things like that.
I want to talk about the predictive capabilities of the technology, and we're going to have to think about a lot of very complicated constitutional questions that arise from it. With massive data sets, the integrity and accuracy with which such technology can predict future human behavior is potentially pretty significant at the individual level, correct?
I think we don't know the answer to that for sure, but let's say it can at least have some impact there.
Okay, so we may be confronted by situations where, for example, a law enforcement agency deploying such technology seeks some kind of judicial consent to execute a search or to take some other police action on the basis of a modeled prediction about some individual's behavior. But that's very different from the kind of evidentiary predicate that normally police would take to a judge in order to get a warrant. Talk me through how you're thinking about that issue.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we continue to understand that these are tools that humans use to make human judgments and that we don't take away human judgment. I don't think that people should be prosecuted based off of the output of an AI system, for example.
We have no national privacy law. Europe has rolled one out to mixed reviews. Do you think we need one?
I think it'd be good.
And what would be the qualities or purposes of such a law that you think would make the most sense based on your experience?
Again, this is very far out of my area of expertise. I think there's many, many people that are privacy experts that could weigh in on what a law needs.
I'd still like you to weigh in.
I mean, I think a minimum is that users should be able to sort of opt out from having their data used by companies like ours or the social media companies. It should be easy to delete your data. I think but the thing that I think is important from my perspective running an AI company is that if you don't want your data used for training these systems, you have the right to do that.
So let's think about how that will be practically implemented. I mean, as I understand it, your tool and certainly similar tools, one of the inputs will be scraping, for lack of a better word, data off of the open web, right, as a low-cost way of gathering information. And there's a vast amount of information out there about all of us. How would such a restriction on the access or use or analysis of such data be practically implemented?
So I was speaking about something a little bit different, which is the data that someone generates, the questions they ask our system, things that they input there, training on that. Data that's on the public web that's accessible, even if we don't train on that, the models can certainly link out to it. So that was not what I was referring to. I think that, you know, there's ways to have your data, or there should be more ways to have your data taken down from the public web, but certainly models with web browsing capabilities will be able to search the web and link out to it.
When you think about implementing a safety or a regulatory regime to constrain such software and to mitigate some risk, is your view that the federal government would make laws such that certain capabilities or functionalities themselves are forbidden in potential? In other words, one cannot deploy or execute code capable of X?
Yes.
Or is it the act itself, X, only when actually executed?
Well, I think both. I'm a believer in defense in depth. I think that there should be limits on what a deployed model is capable of and then what it actually does too.
How are you thinking about how kids use your product?
Well, you have to be 18 or up or have your parents' permission at 13 and up to use a product, but we understand that people get around those safeguards all the time, and so what we try to do is just design a safe product. And there are decisions that we make that we would allow if we knew only adults were using it, that we just don't allow in the product because we know children will use it some way or other too. In particular, given how much these systems are being used in education, we want to be aware that that's happening.
I think and Senator Blumenthal has done extensive work investigating this. What we've seen repeatedly is that companies whose revenues depend upon volume of use, screen time, intensity of use, design these systems in order to maximize the engagement of all users, including children, with perverse results in many cases. And what I would humbly advise you is that you get way ahead of this issue, the safety for children of your product. Or I think you're going to find that Senator Blumenthal, Senator Hawley, others on the subcommittee, and I will look very harshly on the deployment of technology that harms children.
We couldn't agree more. I think we're out of time, but I'm happy to talk about that if I can respond.
Go ahead. Well, it's up to the chairman. Okay.
First of all, I think we try to design systems that do not maximize for engagement. In fact, we're so short on GPUs, the less people use our products, the better. But we're not an advertising-based model. We're not trying to get people to use it more and more. And I think that's a different shape than ad-supported social media. Second, these systems do have the capability to influence in obvious and in very nuanced ways. And I think that's particularly important for the safety of children, but that will impact all of us. One of the things that we'll do ourselves, regulation or not, but I think a regulatory approach would be good for also, is requirements about how the values of these systems are set and how these systems respond to questions that can cause influence. So we'd love to partner with you. Couldn't agree more on the importance.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I just want to say that the senator from Georgia is also very handsome and brilliant, too.
I will allow that comment to stand without objection.
Without objection, okay. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member,
Booker, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's nice that we finally got down to the bald guys down here at the end. I just want to thank you both. This has been one of the best hearings I've had this Congress, and just a testimony to you two as seeing the challenges and the opportunities that AI presents. So I appreciate you both. I want to just jump in. I think very broadly, and then I'll get a little more narrow. Sam, you said very broadly, technology has been moving like this, and we are, a lot of people have been talking about regulation, and so I use the example of the automobile. What an extraordinary piece of technology. I mean, New York City did not know what to do with horse manure. They were having crises, forming commissions, and the automobile comes along, ends that problem. But at the same time, we have tens of thousands of people dying on highways every day. We have emissions crises and the like. There are multiple federal agencies that were created or are specifically focused on regulating cars. And so this idea that this equally transforming technology is coming, and for Congress to do nothing, which is not what anybody here is calling for, little or nothing is obviously unacceptable. I really appreciate Senator Welch and I, who've been going back and forth during this hearing, and him and Bennett have a bill talking about trying to regulate in this space. Not doing so for social media has been, I think, very destructive and allowed a lot of things to go on that are really causing a lot of harm. And so the question is what kind of regulation? You all have spoken that to a lot of my colleagues. And I want to say, Ms. Montgomery, and I have to give full disclosure, I'm the child of 2 IBM parents, but you talked about defining the highest risk uses. We don't know all of them. We really don't. We can't see where this is going. Regulating at the point of risk, and you sort of called not for an agency, and I think when somebody else asks you to specify, because you don't want to slow things down, we should build on what we have in place. But you can envision that we can try to work on 2 different ways, that ultimately a specific, like we have in cars, EPA, NHTSA, the Federal Motor Car Carrier Safety Administration, all of these things, you can imagine something specific that is, as Mr. Marcus points out, a nimble agency that could do monitoring, other things. You can imagine the need for something like that, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, just for the record, then, in addition to trying to regulate with what we have now, you would encourage Congress and my colleague Senator Welch to move forward in trying to figure out the right tailored agency to deal with what we know and perhaps things that might come up in the future.
I would encourage Congress to make sure it understands the technology, has the skills and resources in place to impose regulatory requirements on the uses of the technology and to understand emerging risks as well. So yes.
Yeah, Mr. Marcus, there's no way to put this genie in the bottle. Globally, it's exploding. I appreciate your thoughts, and I shared some with my staff about your ideas of what the international context is. But there's no way to stop this moving forward. So with that understanding, just building on what Ms. Montgomery said, what kind of encouragement do you have as specifically as possible to forming an agency, to using current rules and regulations? Can you just put some clarity on what you've already stated?
Let me just insert, there are more genies yet to come from more bottles. Some genies are already out, but we don't have machines that can really, for example, self-improve themselves. We don't really have machines that have self-awareness, and we might not ever want to go there. So there are other genies to be concerned about. On to the main part of your question. I think that we need to have some international meetings very quickly with people who have expertise in how you grow agencies, in the history of growing agencies. We need to do that in the federal level. We need to do that in the international level. I'll just emphasize one thing I haven't as much as I would like to, which is that I think science has to be a really important part of it. And I'll give an example. We've talked about misinformation. We don't really have the tools right now to detect and label misinformation with nutrition labels that we would like to. We have to build new technologies for that. We don't really have tools yet to detect a wide uptick in cybercrime, probably. We probably need new tools there. We need science to probably help us to figure out what we need to build and also what it is that we need to have transparency around and so forth.
Understood. Sam, just going to you for the little bit of time I have left. Real quick, first of all, you're a bit of a unicorn when I sat down with you first. Could you explain why nonprofit? In other words, you're not looking necessarily, and you've even capped the VC people. Just really quickly, I want folks to understand that.
We started as a nonprofit really focused on how this technology was going to be built. At the time, it was very outside the Overton window that something like AGI was even possible. That's shifted a lot. We didn't know at the time how important scale was going to be, but we did know that we wanted to build this with humanity's best interest at heart, and a belief that this technology could, if it goes the way we want, if we can do some of those things Professor Marcus mentioned, really deeply transform the world. And we wanted to be as much of a force for getting to a positive
I'm going to
vision.
interrupt you. I think that's all good. I hope more of that gets out on the record. The second part of my question as well, I found it fascinating. But are you ever going to, for a revenue model, for return on your investors, are you ever going to do ads or something like that?
I wouldn't say never. I don't think, like, I think there may be people that we want to offer services to and there's no other model that works, but I really like having a subscription-based model. We have API developers pay us, and we have ChatGPT.
Okay, can I
pay
jump
us.
to then can I just jump
Sure.
real quickly? One of my biggest concerns about this space is what I've already seen in the space of Web 2, Web 3, is this massive corporate concentration. It is really terrifying to see how few companies now control and affect the lives of so many of us, and these companies are getting bigger and more powerful. And I see, OpenAI backed by Microsoft, Anthropic is backed by Google. Google has its own in-house product, we know, Bar. So I'm really worried about that. And I'm wondering if Sam, you can give me a quick acknowledgement. Are you worried about the corporate concentration in this space and what effect it might have and the associated risks, perhaps, with market concentration in AI? And then, Mr. Marcus, can you answer that as well?
I think there will be many people that develop models. What's happening on the open source community is amazing, but there will be a relatively small number of providers that can make models at the true
Is there
leading
danger
edge.
in that?
I think there is benefits and danger to that. Like, as we were talking about all of the dangers with AI, the fewer of us that you really have to keep a careful eye on the absolute, like, bleeding edge of capabilities, there's benefits there. But then I think there needs to be enough, and there will, because there's so much value, that consumers have choice, that we have different ideas.
Mr. Marcus, real quick.
There's a real risk of a kind of technocracy combined with oligarchy, where a small number of companies influence people's beliefs through the nature of these systems. Again, I put something in the record about the Wall Street Journal about how these systems can subtly shape our beliefs, and that has enormous influence on how we live our lives. And having a small number of players do that with data that we don't even know about, that scares me.
Sam, I'm sorry.
One more thing I wanted to add. One thing that I think is very important is that what these systems get aligned to, whose values, what those bounds are, that is somehow set by society as a whole, by governments as a whole. And so creating that data set, our alignment data set, it could be an AI constitution, whatever it is, that has got to come very broadly from society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, and I guess the best for last.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Well.
First of all, I want to thank you, Senator Blumenthal, and you, Senator Hawley. This has been a tremendous hearing. Senators are noted for their short attention spans, but I've sat through this entire hearing and enjoyed every minute of it.
You have one of our longer attention spans in the United States, to your great credit.
Well, we've had good witnesses, and it's an incredibly important issue. And here's just, all the questions I have been asked, really, but here's a kind of a takeaway, and what I think is the major question that we're going to have to answer as a Congress. And number one, you're here because AI is this extraordinary new technology that everyone says can be transformative as much as the printing press. Number two, it's really unknown what's going to happen, but there's a big fear you've expressed, all of you, about what bad actors can do and will do if there's no rules of the road. Number three, as a member who served in the House and now in the Senate, I've come to the conclusion that it's impossible for Congress to keep up with the speed of technology. And there have been concerns expressed about social media and now about AI that relate to fundamental privacy rights, bias rights, intellectual property, the spread of disinformation, which in many ways for me is the biggest threat because that goes to the core of our capacity for self-governing. There's the economic transformation, which can be profound. There's safety concerns. And I've come to the conclusion that we absolutely have to have an agency. What its scope of engagement is, it has to be defined by us. But I believe that unless we have an agency, that is going to address these questions from social media and AI, we really don't have much of a defense against the bad stuff, and the bad stuff will come. So last year, I introduced in the House side, and Senator Bennett did in the Senate side, it was the end of the year, a Digital Commission Act, and we're going to be reintroducing that this year. And the two things that I want to ask, one, you've somewhat answered, because I think two of the three of you have said you think we do need an independent commission. You know, and Congress established an independent commission when railroads were running rampant over the interest of farmers, when Wall Street had no rules of the road, and we had the SEC. And I think we're at that point now. But what the commission does would have to be defined and circumscribed. But also, there's always a question about the use of regulatory authority and the recognition that it can be used for good. J.D. Vance actually mentioned that when we were considering his and Senator Brown's bill about railroads in that event in East Palestine, regulation for the public health. But there's also a legitimate concern about regulation getting in the way of things, being too cumbersome, and being a negative influence. So, two of the three of you have said you think we do need an agency. What are some of the perils of an agency that we would have to be mindful of in order to make certain that its goals of protecting many of those interests I just mentioned, privacy, bias, intellectual property, disinformation, would be the winners and not the losers? And I'll start with you, Mr. Altman.